So, good morning, friends. I hope you are able to watch this YouTube live video as I speak. I'm not able to see it here on my phone. Let me check it again. Alt 1. Yes. So, I'm live. I hope you had a great weekend. Me too had a great weekend. It looks a little downcast, overcast in Chennai, a little drizzle here, very beautiful though. So I hope all of you are enjoying your time in your respective places. So in the last class, there was on Friday we discussed new public administration. We had discussed the meaning, scope, and significance of public administration. Meaning, nature, scope, and significance of public administration. We will not discuss evolution because we need to go through all the thinkers before we come to the evolution, because you'll be able to much better appreciate it. We discussed the father of public administration discipline, Wilson's views on public administration, his legacy. And we also discussed what is new public administration as in post-Weberian development. We are not studying Weber though, as of now, but you need to understand that Weber was the person who introduced, in continuation of the scientific management theory of Taylor, Weber is the person who actually made the bureaucracy possible, and it's called Weberian bureaucracy. And at the Weberian development, we had what's called the new public administration, 2 public choice approach or public choice theory, 3 new public management, 4 I don't know why it went there, and 4 new public service, 5 good governance. This we'll learn in paper 2. So we have completed this. Now we're going to public choice theory, and we are moving in an evolutionary process. This from this to this to this to this, right? So that's why we have sequenced that way, right? So what's public choice theory? So you should understand this again. I keep repeating. There is in the 1900s to 1930 or 1929, we had the private sector, okay, giving all goods and services. All the goods and services were provided by private sector. The government sector, the government was providing a regulation. And you know what happened? In America went into a huge downfall in the stock market in the 1930s, which is called the Great Depression. And then government came up with the idea of giving all the role of the provision of goods and services to the public sector enterprises. And the public sector enterprises, they became a monopoly. They provide all the goods and services. And when they become a monopoly, they become corrupt. They also appoint their own people, nepotism. All these are features of what we call as a not bureaucracy. It is a feature of spoil system which was there in the spoil system, which is part of the monarchy. Okay, whenever there is dictatorship, spoil system is there. Now, when we are having a complete democracy in US, and when you appoint public sector enterprises, they become a dictator. They become a spoil system. The bureaucracy gives rise to the spoil system here. So people started suffering because there was no choice for goods and services. No choice. Right? Only one choice. Government, public sector enterprises. They were the commanding heights of the economy. And obviously, they will follow what's called rules and regulations for their benefit, because means are more important here. Means are more important than the ends. So, operation successful, patient died. So that's called goal displacement, because we are having what is called the Weberian bureaucracy here. Weberian. We are having the Weberian bureaucracy here. Bureaucracy, and they are politically neutral, value neutral. This is essentially, so it just follows the current bureaucracy that we have in India, except that Indian bureaucracy have also values, which means what? They will listen to what the politician says or the political executive says, who's supposed to have all the values, take care of the values. But they will also apply their own values in the evolutionary process, in the bureaucratic process. So whereas in Germany and other countries which are already prosperous, there was no need to have values. Right? So that's the essential difference. So you'll not be able to see. Sorry for this. Right. No. So the state was becoming inefficient. So the role of the state and the bureaucracy and the public sector enterprises was becoming inefficient, and this was being questioned. And because they were following what's called the Weberian bureaucracy, and because there was this public sector enterprises as a result of this Weberian bureaucracy, people were having no choices for goods and services, which means what? Inefficiency. What are they trying to achieve? Efficiency, effectiveness, economy. That is exactly opposite what was being achieved, right? So to check the natural tendency for over-government and to limit the activities of the government, various measures were suggested, including constitutional reforms to limit the role of government, decentralization of political power, etc. But one such measure was the adoption of public choice approach, which aimed at improving the efficiency by applying economics. This is the most important thing. By applying economics to the study of political processes, institutions, and public policy. So this is very important. One, it will be goods and services. Provision of goods and services. Goods and services. Second is political process. How is the election process happening? How are the bureaucratic institutions functioning? How are public policies being done on the basis of this public choice? So they applied all this, and they came out with certain assumptions. And especially for these political process institutions and public policy, we now have, the government, even if it's Bavarian bureaucracy, they take advantage of the knowledge from the private sector, from NGOs, from civil society organizations, from general public. They put it on the website, ask for comments, etc. That's basically public choice, right? So, but the biggest gainer was the citizens, because they had choices in terms of goods and services, right? We'll come to that. So, applying the principles of economics. What are the principles of economics? There are only two things: rationality and choice. The term public choice was coined in the late 1960s and gained prominence in the discipline of public administration studies. Anthony Downs, very important thinker, Anthony Downs, in his book Inside Democracy, Applied Public Choice Theory in Economics to Politics, Anthony Downs. Then another thinker is Winston Armstrong. We'll have around 6-7 thinkers, and these are thinkers which you need to keep in mind. And the moment when you say Anthony Downs, the mind should immediately go to public choice or Winston Armstrong. These are names that you associate with public choice theory. There are others called Pat Buchanan. Then there's somebody called what is this guy? I forget the name. So there are different schools of thought headed by different people, and we'll come to them as we see. So Winston Armstrong also said public administration scholars should turn away from traditional bureaucratic approach. When you say traditional bureaucratic approach, it means Weberian bureaucracy, and then move towards public choice. So the public choice basically applies economics to the study of political process, institution, public policy, and when economics is applied, the focus shifts to efficiency and rationality. Efficiency and rationality, right? Right. Now, Dennis Muller defines public choice approach as an economic study of non-market decision making, or simply the application of economics to political science. Even at that point of time, it is political science, even though public administration come out as an entirely separate discipline. But Dennis Muller says when you apply economic study of non-market decision making, or simply the application of economics to political science, that's when public choice approach gets defined. So the subject matter of public choice is the same as that of political science. What is it? Theory of the state, voting rules, voter behavior, party politics, bureaucracy, etc. And the approach also looks at the behavior of typical bureaucrat in drawing inferences and constructing its theoretical frame. So, in public choice theory, we should understand that obviously public choice means what? So, the citizens. Who are the stakeholders in this public choice? Stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? Citizens. Second, who are the providers? Bureaucrats. Third, superior guys, that is politicians. Now, obviously, there will be an institution here. Right? So, basically these three. So, you will find Weber studying how it helps citizens. Weber applying these public choice thinkers applying economics to see how the bureaucrats behave and how the politicians behave. So this is very important for you to understand this. It's not only public choice that we are looking at. It's looking at how different sections of people, including bureaucrats and politicians, maximize their benefits before they give any benefit to the public. So it's not a hunky-dory thing. Politics is all about first self-satisfying. Right? So the first thing is about citizens. What is it? Public choice approach is in favor of democratic administration. What do you mean by democratic administration? Which means that goods and services will be provided by different people. It will be public sector enterprises. It can be NGOs. It can be private sector. It can be civil society organizations. It can be clubs. It can be volunteers. All kinds of people can, but only thing is government should coordinate. And today you see public choice in action in India. Airlines. Earlier it was only Air India or Indian Airlines. Today we have 1, 2, 3, 4 airlines, right? Different private sector. Second is telecom. Earlier you had only BSNL, right? Today we have 1, 2, 3, 4. You have Airtel, Jio, Vodafone, all those guys, right? I think here it will become a monopoly again with Reliance becoming so powerful, right? That's also a possibility. So India is a beneficiary of this public choice approach after 1992 LPG, that is liberalization, privatization, globalization initiative, because we had no choice at that point of time because we are in a severe balance of payment crisis. We had to sell our gold or bequeath our gold or pledge our gold in the British treasury to make money to ensure that we pay for our petroleum, etc. Right. So this is democratic administration means giving choices to people. Similarly, democratic administration give people what they want. So what essentially, how do you apply economics? It says that it studies the process by which people indicate preferences and choices and approach thus emphasizes on widening the choices, right? And in fulfilling the ideal of popular choice, the actions of the government should be consistent with the values and interests of. So citizens should be prime focus of the government. They should be able to understand what the citizens need. That's why they have the election process. And this is the most important thing in democratic administration, which is individuals act rationally. Individuals act rationally with adequate information. So you give them if there is an asymmetry of information, they will not act rationally. There is a sufficient information, they will give the preferences. Let's say there are 10 choices, they will say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They'll do these preferences and then they will choose the best. How do they do the preferences? High quality at low cost. So people are very good at this. Individuals in the market are very good at rationalizing. That is, adequate. They will act rationally, and individuals utility maximizers. Right? You go and buy something, you'll always go and buy something. You'll always, but what's the cost? I want this, but what's the cost? You know that's the best quality. That's the best quality. And you'll always negotiate. Right? So the basic premise of this approach is that every individual is driven by self-interest, and this is very, very critical. Every individual. Please read this very carefully. Every individual. So we talked about citizens. Obviously, they are individuals. Then we talked about bureaucrats. That also comes under every individual. And we also talk about politicians. That also comes under every individual. So every individual is driven by self-interest. Citizen, self-interest. Bureaucrat, self-interest. Politician, self-interest. Institutions, institutional interests. Right? So every individual is driven by self-interest and thus focuses on maximizing his or her own self-interest as a rational person. So rationality, when the choice is given that is rational, it tries to maximize its utility. So when you apply this perception or assumption to the role of government and bureaucracy, public choice approach makes an important inference. The politicians or bureaucrats do not act out of benevolence or that they have public interest in mind. Rather, as an individual, rational thinker, they think about self-interest first and try to maximize self-interest. For instance, politicians may think of actions that would help them to get re-elected or win a party ticket. So why do they give all these freebies? Why do they give the freebies? Is it to make people well off? No. It's only so that they can. This is basically a method of bribing the people to vote. Right? So that's again self-interest, right? The politician has only self-interest. He wants to continue to be an MLA or an MP or a minister. His thoughts about the poor and the people will come only after he gets elected. So we'll try all kinds of stuff. So look at this. Next. Similarly, a bureaucrat may have career promotions or increase in status and power in mind when undertaking reforms or actions. So, and this is the most important statement. So civil servants are self-aggrandizing bureaucrats, interested only in expansion of activities and their charge, while political leaders are vote-seeking politicians, maximizing the votes. Self-aggrandizing, this you had to learn by heart. Self-aggrandizing politicians and vote-seeking, self-aggrandizing bureaucrats. This is something which the public choice approach thinkers deliberately put. Self-aggrandizing bureaucrats, vote-seeking politicians. Self-aggrandizing bureaucrats, vote-seeking politicians. So this is the essence of public choice theory itself. So this we said, at least cost, high quality. So as far as democratic administration is concerned, the approach believes that a variety of different organizations can be involved in providing different public goods and services, and such organizations can be coordinated through various multi-organization arrangements. So this is how public choice school locates public administration within the domain of politics. So if a question is asked, how is public choice approach located within the domain of public administration or politics? You have to talk about democratic administration, because that's their first preference. So public choice theory approach or public choice approach believe completely in democratic administration. So that's how they have located a public choice within the domain of politics or public administration, right? Can thus be understood that public choice is essentially a state reducing and a market expanding doctrine. A state reducing, again, we can use all this state reducing and market expanding doctrine, justified by its view that government decision making is based on collective interest rather than individual citizens' interests. So, this is very, very critical for you to understand. This particular sentence is very, very important. This is essentially what are we trying to say? This is the essential public choice. That is a state reducing and market expanding. Obviously, we want state to do minimum. You have other providers also. So the problem here is government decision making is based on collective interest, not on individual interest. Please say collective versus individual. So this is the reason why they are saying public. So see what happens in the collective interest. Let's assume that there are 100 people and government is providing for services. So here 51, let's say there are two sets of people. 51% is for government and 49% is against government, against the political party. So what happens is 51% people will be happy. 49% people are unhappy. They are forced to do what the 51% is being done against their will. Right? So this is essentially a collective approach. Whereas public choice theory is always a individual approach because it's based on individual rationalization. The rationalization happens based on the preferences, 1, 2, 3 preferences, and then maximizing the utility in terms of high quality versus low cost. High quality plus low cost. Please understand this. This is the most important thing that you need to understand when you approach public choice theory, right? Right. So government decision is based on collective interests rather than individual interests. That's why it's a state reducing and market expanding doctrine, right? What are the methodologic basis for public choice approach? This is very, very critical. There's a notion of rationality that we have talked. There's something called methodological individualism. There's something called politics as exchange. This is Pat Buchanan. And institutional pluralism. We understood what is institutional pluralism. That is large number of organizations providing goods and services. That's basically individual pluralism. But we are not seeing what is, we are seeing rationality also, the notion of. But we need to understand these two. Right? So let's go into these things. The notion of rationality, methodological individualism. So when you approach, what is approach or what is the basis for public choice approach? We have seen notion of rationality and institutional pluralism. There's something called methodological individualism and politics as exchange. We need to understand each one in its entirety. What is this notion of rationality? We have said this. The fundamental idea is that people try to do the best they can given this constraints that they face. People assume to be able to rank alternatives. We assume that they can rank the alternatives and choose the most preferred alternative and will also be very consistent with their choices. And when you apply this notion of rationality to politics, the basic implication that public choice theory makes is that politics should not be analyzed from a public interest but from an individual gain maximizing one. So that's why we are saying, we are applying this rationality to political process, to political institutions, to so many other areas, right? Where the stakeholders are all there. So they try to move from democratic administration into the arena of politics and said, let's see how this pans out. So when you apply this individual ranking This is very important. Individual is able to rank and have the best quality at low price. This is called utility maximization. So only individuals can utility maximize. The society cannot maximize. Society does not maximize. Of course, if 100% of the people maximizes, then society will maximize. But it doesn't happen. Generally, some percentage will always be in another boat, right? So people assume to be able to rank alternatives. Applying this to politics, when you apply this to politics, what happens? Basic implication is that public choice theory is that politics should not be analyzed from a public interest perspective, but from an individual gain maximizing one. This was actually debunked by somebody else. We'll learn who is that, and we'll learn those 6 differences, which they very cogently put. Okay. So, and all participants in the political arena, politicians, bureaucrats, voters, and stakeholders act to maximize their own gains. So, one is democratic administration. Now we come into the arena of politics and saying that even there, it is not the collective interest, it's the individual interest that matters. Please understand this. This is very critical for you to understand the thought process of the thinkers of public choice approach. And it's very interesting. Even from an academic point of view, it's very interesting. Only democratic administration has been practically implemented. Rest of the things are all in the realm of theory. What is methodological individuals? So we talked about rationality. That is, everybody is trying to rationalize, whether it's a politician, bureaucrat, voter, or stakeholder. All of these stakeholders rationalize in the political arena also, and in the market arena also. So we are talking about the market versus administration, right? So in the market also, individual rationalizes. They say in the political arena also, they try to maximize, and they don't study it from the point of view of public interest. There's nothing about public interest. It's individual self-interest at every angle. The citizens' angle, the politicians' angle, the bureaucrat angle, etc. Right? Now, second base for public choice approach is methodological individualism. What is this? It's coined by John Joseph Schumpeter. And they say they reject society as an organism and considers a holistic approach. Don't study at the level of society. Level of analysis should be the individual. So he says, even when you study collective units like a society, even when you study a society, don't do it at societal level. Do it at the basic unit of the individual. The individual should be the unit of analysis, both as a basic unit of decision making as well as the unit for whom the decision is made. So this is the idea of methodological individualism. And groups, organizations, or even societies are nothing more than the individuals comprising them. So study it don't think it from the public interest point of view. There's nothing called public interest. It's all self-interest. So this question on public interest versus self-interest, you should immediately think about methodological individualism and the notion of rationality and public choice approach. Okay. Right. So that is methodological individualism. Now, until you read it a few times, you will tend to forget this. Okay. Please understand this. You need to read this many times over. So while many other approaches talk of group decision making, PCA denies the legitimacy of group decision making at the group level. PCA denies the legitimacy. It says only individual choices, even though you are studying in the society. Politics as exchange. This is very simple. That is, let's assume that you are standing for election. What will I do as a corporate? I'll give you, let's say, 1 crore or 10 crore rupees for your election purpose. I will not say anything else. I'm only saying because you're standing for elections, you need funds, keep 10 crores. Okay. I give you 10 crores. When you come to power, you will feel obligated to my organization. What will you do? You will give a slight policy shift which will help me gain 1000 crores out of this. Right? So where is 10 crores? Why do people invest 10 crores? We think, oh, 10 crores is a big amount. But what do they gain? They gain 1000 crores out of this. This is called politics as exchange. So there's an exchange mechanism here, like in the market. The market has an exchange mechanism, right? Let's say the stock market. Similar thing is politics. There's an exchange here which will give you a return. Here also you get a return. So if you remember, you read about politics and administration dichotomy. Similar, politics as exchange. This is something we can brought out by what's called the Vienna School, Virginia School of Public Choice, Pat Buchanan and others. Okay, so this is so interesting. It's this bribe taking, how it's being described in terms of economics. So that's what you need to understand here. Public choice theory is the application of economics to non-economic decision making, especially in the field of politics and administration. Politics as exchange. I'll just read it out for you. Politics as exchange. PC considers that realization of certain ends arises as a result of bargaining and exchange among individuals. Again, we are talking only about individuals, right? How the exchange takes place in the political or public sphere rather than the market sphere. The exchange is not just in terms of apple for oranges, but the exchange takes place in the political realm between various players to get mutual benefit. For instance, donations offered by corporates and other businessmen to political parties to meet election expenditure are in exchange for services that the party would offer the corporate agencies when they come to power. What I said. In such a trade, each participant secures the benefits of order. This is very important. Benefits of order. I said no. 10 crores. You give to the politician and reap 1000 crores out of it. That's the benefit of order, right? So it's scale, basically. In such a trade, each participant secures the benefits of order, thereby reducing the need to exchange his or her own resources. So entire 1000 crores he doesn't give. He just gives 5 or 10 crores and gets back. Proponents state that the politics as exchange model, the focus should be on the process rather than on the outcome. Okay, whatever that means. Institutional pluralism is all about democratic administration. I explained that. All such propositions lead to an additional proposition of institutional pluralism, the delivery of goods and services. Right? That is the approach states that. So institutional pluralism means what? Democratic administration. That is, give people a choice. Your job of the public administration is only to coordinate. Right? So that's the approach states that a variety of institutional arrangements are required to provide different goods and services. Explain this. So stresses about the avoiding the individual institutional weakness created by dominant bureaucratic form. So a dominant bureaucratic form like a public sector unit or a PSE enterprise. It's a dominant bureaucratic form. It is corrupt. It is a monopoly. It's got nepotism. In fact, all the things that the spoil system entailed. And we moved from the spoil system to bureaucracy. Because we can have good people selected through an examination and going by the Weberian bureaucracy. But once they become they lose sight of their roles. They believe that rules are more important. It's called goal displacement or operation successful, patient dying. Right? That's what happens. Everybody will say, and when they quote also, they can justify saying that I did this on public interest, for public interest. There's no public interest here. They're just trying to extract a rent. It's basically a rent-seeking behavior. Please understand this. When people talk rules, please understand that they're trying to seek a rent out of you, a bribe out of you. When there are many institutions, people have more choice, which helps in meeting the consumer preferences. This also helps in reducing the monopoly of state. For instance, Indian Railways. We have only one Indian railway. There's no other private railway, right? No choice. What are the features of public choice approach? And this is Very critical for you to understand. It's an anti-bureaucratic approach. It sees bureaucracy as an absolute evil, as it seeks its own selfish interest. Bureaucracy seeks its own selfish or self-interest at the expense of the public interest. Right? It's a critic of the bureaucratic model of administration assumes that self-seeking administrator bureaucrat and the vote maximizing politician, instead of acting in public interest, produce goods and services for their own benefit. As a result, the collective interest of society suffers. This is so true. And it encourages institutional pluralism in the provision of goods and services. Plurality of governments and public agencies is support on the ground of consumer preferences. So, this is one of the features. What are the other features? It applies economic logic to the problems of public service distribution. We know all this. We have studied this, so I will not explain. It stands for diverse democratic decision-making centers, decentralization, and popular participation in administration. It also stands for democratic decision-making centers. Democratic, so these are words that you need to remember. Public choice approach is always talking about democracy. It's always talking about decentralization. It's always talking about public participation, etc. Right? Because it creates opportunity for the promotion of competition among government agencies. In the process, individual citizens' choices increase. When choices increase, you get what is called the benefit of scale. You get better quality at lower costs. Right? Better quality products and services or goods and services at lower costs. It promotes competition. It emphasizes privatization or contracting out to reduce wastage. So as you read new public management also, new public management. This is an extreme form of PCA. What they said was perform or perish to the public sector enterprises. This is basically Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, right? It wants more information to be given to the people. So in economics, there's something called asymmetric information. Asymmetric information. Please read about it. So somebody who is a producer, he has more knowledge of the product, right? Whereas the consumer has less knowledge. So that's why he doesn't bargain or anything. He doesn't know what are the items that have gone into the production of that good. He doesn't know what are the costs of those items. He doesn't know what are the processes that have been gone through, right, in producing. Let's say it's a sandal. It's a sandal, or let's say it's a chapel. We don't know what are the processes that go. Does the vulcanization happen? We don't know. So that's why they kind of put the prices that they put, because we have no idea how these prices are arrived at. Whatever price they put, we kind of try to bargain, but we have no idea. You know, when I was in the Handicrafts Development Corporation, that's the time I realized for a good that we produce for 100, we actually sell for 200. So, because we are a public sector enterprise, we are not so efficient, etc. Of course, I made it efficient, that's a different thing. But this is a 100% increase in your profits, right? So that's how public doesn't know. They'll say, okay, bring it down to 190. We're still happy with 90. Or bring it down to 180. We're still happy with 80, right? So that's what happens. So that asymmetric information can be bridged by giving more information, right? It encourages dissemination of more information for public benefit about the availability of alternatives to public services offered on a competitive basis and at competitive costs. PCA. So after moving from democratic administration, also advocates political approach to public administration by locating public administration within the domains of politics. politics. In the last 2 to 3 decades, the private sector has expanded. The state sector has shrunk. So these are the impacts of public adoption of private sector practices in the public sector also, for which PC has a major role to play. Now, we come to the different schools of thought in a public choice approach. There is a there's a Rochester School of Public Choice. There's a Chicago School of Public Choice. There's a Virginia School of Public Choice. And there's an individual choice, collective choice group also. Right? Let's look at each school of thought. What does the Rochester School of Public Choice say? It says that you should be studying the individuals more than the groups. Right? So that's the standard public choice approach. So again, second thing is that if you study politics from the standpoint of public interest, you are missing the woods for the trees. Politics don't study from public interest point of view, because every individual is trying to maximize their self-interest. There's nothing called public interest. So they are the standard, very orthodox public choice approach school. So they say study it from the individual point of view. Right? And third, what is that? The chief contributors are Riker and Ortschuk. William Riker and Peter Ortschuk. You just need to remember this. You can think, keep it in mind also, by heart it. You don't need to go deep into this because you're not supposed to. We should know that there was a Rochester school which basically thought about politics as an individual thing, acts against public interest. And when you study groups for anything, even for market purposes, study only individuals and not groups, right? So the chief contributors of the Rochester School are William H. Riker and Peter Ortschuk. Now, what does the Chicago School of Public Administration say? Basically, more on politics and government. Basically, in the field of regulation. And this is the most important thing. Earlier, the contribution to this field was to regulate the monopoly so that efficiencies can be increased and costs reduced. So they are saying there are the monopolies. They are not talking so much about public choice as opposed to regulating this, so that you can increase the efficiency and reduce the costs. So they are the Chicago School. Let's see what else they say. So the other thing which Stigler pointed out was that they will capture this regulatory process itself to earn benefits at the cost of consumers, right? So you will see this in the telecom sector. At some point of time, you apply that of Geo and all. So at some point, the regulatory process, they don't know who, because they're a dominant group. So they who are regulated by a state themselves capture the regulatory process and actually earn benefits at the cost of consumers. That's a Chicago School of Public Choice. For example, big business, farmers, large farmers often benefit from regulation. So one of the things that the government of India is saying, the reason why they went for the agriculture laws, 3 agriculture laws, against which a lot of farmers are still agitating, is because the regulatory process was captured by the big farmers of Punjab, Haryana and Western Europe, the big farmers. The whole, what is called APMC, Agriculture Process Produce Manufacture, APMC, Management Committee, was peopled by all the rich and mighty. All the big guys were really peopling this, so they were benefiting more. What about the small and marginal farmers? Right? So that's one of the examples they can give the Chicago School of Public Choice, but they're talking more about regulation rather than public choice. Public gets a choice because your efficiency of the public sector enterprise is increased through regulation. And because the efficiency is increased, there is a lower costs involved. Right? That's the Chicago School of Public Choice. The main contributors are Milton Friedman and Robert Lucas. In fact, Milton Friedman is actually a very, very fierce critic of government. They saying, "Why are you in the process of giving goods and services, of providing goods and services? You just take care of regulation. The market will take care of goods and services." Milton Friedman and Robert Lucas. Milton Friedman, Robert Lucas, Chicago School of Public Choice. Well, the other one was Ortschuk and Riker. Riker and Ortschuk. William H. What is that? The names? William H. Riker and Peter Ortschuk. And Chicago School of Public Choice, the main contributors are Milton Friedman, and Robert Lucas. Virginia School, and the most important school, James Buchanan and Gordon Tulloch. They included the elements of political and moral philosophy. So, to the analysis of the political process, this school added the concept of politics as exchange, because both the individuals, the corporate individuals and the politicians who are benefiting, is actually doing it for their self-interest, right? While they believe in rational choice, but the school points out that the utility maximization is fine at the individual level. Utility maximization is fine at the individual level because individuals rationalize. They know how to rank the choices. They know how to select the choice and be consistent with it. But in a broad social sense, society does not maximize. So that also goes consistent with the public choice approach. So the essential difference is that though the use of economics is good for political science, it considers both to be different. Politics and economics are different. You can apply economics to politics, but they are different. That's what the Virginia School of Public Choice says. Now let's look at why they are saying that, and that's very important. This has been asked in questions in your public administration optional. Please understand this. Why they are saying that? They're saying that because the choices made by individuals in the market are entirely different from the collective choices made by people in the political voting process. Politics, market. What they are saying is the individual makes rational choices here. Right? The individual. It's the choice made by the individual. Right? Whereas here the choices are made by what's called the collective choice. Right? Politics is collective choice, market is individual choice. And so, because it is like that, even though the others said you study at the individual level and all, what they're saying is you cannot really apply this principle here because there are differences. What are the differences? 6 differences. I'll explain those 6 differences with the help of this table. So look at the individual choice in the market. So individual choice, when you put it here, you always qualify it as market. And here, politics. So in the market, individual chooses for himself, herself, and the relevant outcome is determined by his own choice. I want to go and buy a pen, I get benefit of that. In the political voting process, the relevant outcome for all the individuals is determined by the choice of all. So even if I vote for A party, somebody else will vote for B party, somebody else. But finally, only C party wins. What happens to my choices? There is greater uncertainty and the individual has less control over the outcome. There is full control of the outcome in the individual choice in the market. There's very little outcome choice, very little control over the outcome in the political collective choice. So that's one. Second one is market is quite impersonal for the individual. Whether it makes he can't make a difference because there are millions of or thousands of buyers and sellers. There are buyers, buyers and sellers in the market. So even if he negotiates and brings down the price, it's not really going to affect the market price, right? Only the individual price will be affected. He'll get a positive or he'll get a reduced price. But the market is quite impersonal. It doesn't change at all. It's like putting a drop of water in the ocean. Whereas in the collective choice, the voter knows that her vote has a determining role in the final social outcome. And so what happens is that the individual might use different values and subjective preferences. So let's assume that there's a party A which is talking about against corruption, and is all alone. Then there's a party B which does not talk about corruption, but it's been there for the last 50 years. And the general feeling is that even though, let's say, individual X, Y, Z, X wants to vote for A, he still thinks that his vote is going to get wasted because the A may not win. So he still wants the kind of activity, manifesto they have said in party B. So actually party B will win. So that's why they're saying they might use different values and subjective preference in the scale of making choice. Very, very important. How they went deep into it. This is actually research. Please understand this. What Pat Buchanan and the Virginia School have done, Gordon Tullock and others have done, is to actually go deep and say, no, your using of economics to political science cannot work here because this is a market and this is politics. Right? And the market, since the decision made by the individual impacts the individual, she feels responsible. Whereas this guy, sometimes he'll feel, here he says, okay, I can give my vote to the person who's going to win. But sometimes he'll say, my vote, I'm not going to the guy, give the guy a dominant party guy, but I will vote, if at all, I'll vote for the non-corrupt guy. But still, I may not turn out to vote because the sense of responsibility is absent. Here, there's a sense of responsibility. There's no sense of responsibility. Right? What is the fourth difference? I hope you are with me. I think one person is listening. In the market, the consumer is provided with alternatives to make choices. So in the market, you go and want to buy a pen, there will be 1,000 pens or hundreds of pens or lakhs of pens available. You have a choice. Whereas in the political environment, the choice is limited to what are the choices? Limited to A, B, C, or D max. You don't get millions of choices, right? And each unit spent by an individual goes towards the purchase of some good and nothing goes waste. Nothing goes waste in a market. Whereas my vote may not end up in the winning of that candidate. Right? So, in the political environment, voting may be made for a candidate who loses. All individuals who tend to vote for the loser turn out to be the minority, whose preferences eventually do not determine the political agenda. I told you this. Thus, an individual is compelled to accept the result contrary to his preferences. Such coercion is never present in the market. Right? And in the market, there is unequal purchasing power and distribution of income. A rich person is there, the poor person is there, the middle class is there, lower middle class, the upper class is there, depending on their economic status. Whereas in the political sphere, irrespective of your economic status, there's only one vote. Right? So these are the 6 differences. What Pat Buchanan and Gordon Tullock say, you cannot, even though you can apply market principles to politics, these are essentially different things, and it illustrates with the help of 6 differences that they have identified. Well, the proponents of public choice approach, Gordon Tullock. So you need to remember this. Vincent Ostrom, who said that, what did Vincent Ostrom say? Don't look at the society, study. When you study societies, study at the individual level. William Niskanen, very interesting theorist, will come that. James Buchanan and Patrick Dunleavy. We also have, what's his name? Gordon Tullock. So Gordon Tullock is our first one mentioned. Gordon Tullock, Vincent Ostrom, William Niskanen, James Buchanan, Patrick Dunleavy, and the person who wrote the book Inside Democracy, which is, we'll come to that. We'll discuss him also. Patrick. See, these are names we cannot forget. Gordon Tullock, Vincent Ostrom, William Niskanen, James Buchanan, Patrick Dunleavy. There's also a person called Nat Wicksell, very important thinker. He says that all the collective decisions that you get out of politicians is not from their benevolent mind, but not with the public interest in mind. It emerged because of a process. It emerged because of a political process. So Wicksell was the first to suggest that a collective decision or a public sector decision or a political decision emerges from a political process rather than emerging from the mind of a benevolent politician working with public interest. So there's nothing called a benevolent politician, there's nothing called public interest. These are all self-seeking, vote-seeking, rent-seeking politicians. But because they go through a process, you get a better collective decision. That's what they're saying. So in his dissertation, he expresses concern for the 49% people or the minority people who gets, who has to go with the unregulated majority. And he seems to say that, he stated that the majority rule seemed to impose cost or damage on the large segments of taxpayer or citizens. Right? They are not in agreement with these policies of the majority, but they feel that they are imposing a cost or damage. He thus questioned why minorities who face discrimination should lend support. So he's asking, out of 100, 51 gets a government of the choice, 49 doesn't get. Why should they ever follow government? That's a very dangerous thing to ask, actually. So he says, go by unanimity. Is that possible? It's all very utopian. So Nat Wicksell is a utopian thinker. He thinks that everybody should have a consensus, should go by unanimous agreement. That will never happen. Sit in a family and try to discuss, that will never happen. Right? That's Nat Wicksell for you. You can't forget Nat Wicksell. Gordon Tullock, they are from the Virginia School. The earliest contribution to the public choice approach. So he was one of the first persons to say self-seeking politicians and rent-seeking politicians or self-seeking politicians and self-aggrandizing bureaucrats. And that laid the foundation for the debate on the dangers of the power of bureaucracy. So you give a lot more power to them, they become extremely self-centered. And this leads to politicization of the public policy because you have self-aggrandizing. Is the spelling right? Aggrandizing bureaucrats and vote bar rent seeking politicians. So he said that these two people can create havoc and we should have sufficient control over them. It will lead to politicization of public policy itself. For him, the study of politics, policy planning, bureaucracy should be based on the same assumptions which might be used to explain the behavior of firms, business people, and consumers. So he has moved a little away from the individual or society, individual or collective, towards the comparison of the market like firms, business people, consumers. Right? So very subtle difference is pointed out. So that's very interesting, right? Right. That's Gordon to Locke. From his theorizing, there could emerge the following set of generalizations. One is political parties contesting elections make excessive promise to get votes. Obviously, they are rent-seeking, vote maximizing. They manipulate the economy to make this happen. The bureaucracy has increased its power because of its self-seeking nature and not public interest. So, because of this, it's important to control or supervise the growth of political and bureaucratic power. And politicians will attempt to manipulate and stimulate the economy before elections and deflate the economy after the elections. So that's Gordon to luck for you. So another important contribution made by Tulloch is the rent-seeking concept. Rent-seeking extends the idea of profit motive from the economic sphere to the sphere of collective action. So rent-seeking. So when you give put a money in the bank, you get interest. So what is that? It's basically a rent. When you give a house to somebody for a cost, that's also called rent. So this is in the market sphere. When you apply this rent seeking to the political sphere, what happens is that the politician will go to the individual and say, or group of individuals say, give me so much money, I will do this for you. Right? So he's taking a service charge. Right? So basically, rent-seeking politician means a politician will take service charge because he also needs to survive, right? Where will he go for the money for his breakfast, lunch, and dinner? It's very easy for us to say they are all corrupt, but where do they go for there? But you know what happens is that this becomes this rent-seeking. They're asking for survival. It's okay. It is okay. They're basically asking for survival and they're asking for a service charge for their survival. But when this becomes so huge, that's the time we have a problem, right? And obviously the service charge will lead to that only. That's why we should nip it at this, but first time, every time. Corruption is the biggest biggest shame in India. Biggest shame. We should all feel ashamed. At lower levels, there's one called bribe. At higher levels, there's something called commission. But both are the one and the same. One is at lower cost, the other is at a higher cost. So rent seeking extends the idea of profit motive from the economic sphere to the sphere of collective action. And it presupposes that if there is a value to be gained through politics, then persons will invest resources and efforts to capture this value. So what's happening? Very interesting. So we are supposed to spend 30.8 lakhs. In Tamil Nadu, we are supposed to spend 30.8 lakhs when you contest for an MLA election. Right? But they say people spend 40 to 50 crores. Why do they invest these resources? Because they want to capture that value through politics. So this is interesting. So this is called rent seeking. So if you get a question on rent seeking, if you get about Gordon to Locke and its application of rent seeking, Gordon to Locke, profit motive, and the application of rent seeking to capturing the value of politics. Can thus be understood that the modern politics is mostly based on rent-seeking activity. Rent-seeking examples include lobbying by interest groups. America, lobbying is very legal. India, lobbying is not legal. So lobbying by interest groups to gain from some policy, creating artificial monopolies that generate rents, etc. So we talked about the um, purchase of computer by Mr. Narayana Murthy of Infosys. He had to go 50 times to Delhi to get hold of the finally get hold of the computer. Why? Because everybody was trying to extract money from Narayana Murthy. And because he's such an honest person and he did not pay money, he'll say, okay, come next week. Everybody was asking him to postpone his visit. Come next week, come next week, come after the state, etc. Why were they doing that? They're putting a premium on taking the decision, which is basically rent seeking, right? So, to lock in common with the other educates recommend that introduction of competition and bureaucracy through contracting out. So, even without adding more players within the bureaucracy itself, we can increase competition by contracting out. It's called outsourcing, privatizing, and increasing competition between government departments by rewarding performance. So, Tulok is not essentially saying bring all the sectors, all NGOs, civil society organizations, private sector, individuals, clubs, etc. He's saying make competition within the private sector, public sector itself by reducing contracting out, which is called outsourcing, privatization, increasing competition between government departments, etc., by rewarding performances. We come to James Buchanan in public choice theory. He's a Nobel Prize winning economist, scholar in public choice. He's a person who brought in what is called the politics as exchange. He has argued that individuals come together in politics for their own mutual benefit, just as they come together in the marketplace. We know this. He says that as the case with efficiency, persons are not likely to express interest in abstract distribution levels, ideals for society in general when in political decisions. They are likely instead to seek further their own well-defined interests. This is very interesting. As a case with efficiency, persons are not likely to express interest in abstract distribution levels. That is, they are not. When you talk about distribution, it essentially means equity. Right? Are they thinking about economic equity? Are they thinking about social equity? When they do those decisions, they're saying no. They are taking those decisions only to further their own self-interest. So, according to Buchanan, individuals come together in politics for their own mutual benefit. Right? And Buchanan's choice, there are two normative rules. Normative means what? Normative is the opposite of empirical. That is, you just watch or observe and report. Called empirical studies. No, they're just watching how the public administrators are working and just report it. The other one is normative. You say now it is like this. After some time, it will be like this. It's called assess. The private sector will understand assess and how it should be. It's called normative. Right? So one is the politics as exchange. Second is economic constitutionalism or contractorianism on the basis of public policy making. Let me rub this off somewhat here. Right. So politics as exchange is brought about by Buchanan, an economic constitutional. We know politics as exchange, right? We explained that. What is this constitutionalism? Saying that existing institutions, constitutions, or structures or rules are subject to critical scrutiny, which means that the provisions given in the constitution are subject to critical review. So what you're saying is that don't stay where you are with this particular act. Don't say over the next 1,000 years the act will remain like that. No, this is also likely to change or get amended. right? That's called economic constitutionalism. Existing structures or rules are the subject of critical scrutiny, which means that the provisions given in the Constitution are subject to critical review. See, for example, Right to Education Act came in 2009. Now, this right to education is actually mentioned as a directive principle of state policy that the state will try to provide free and compulsory education to all. It's not justiciable. No government need to be taken to court on public interest. But at some point, it became an act, which means that from the directive principles, although it is non-justiciable, it also meant that we have evolved as a society and we want this right to education, right? So the person who wrote the book called Inside Democracy, that's Anthony Down. What are his views? His views are on bureaucratic behavior, a psychological approach. He says bureaucratic growth takes place as a result of loss and how the motivation of individuals and bureaucracy are in the way in which they set about maximizing their interests. In his book, he assumes that decision making in bureaucrats is informed by the pursuit of public self interest, not public interest. Down suggests that motivation of individual officials are diverse, such as power, money, income, prestige, personality, loyalty, security, etc. These are things that the individual bureaucrat looks up to. So based on that, so basically he's talking about the bureaucracy. It's a scientific approach to bureaucracy, and it says that bureaucrats can be of different types. They can be the climber, or they can be a conserver, or they can be a zealot, or they can be an advocate, or they can be a statesman. How easy or how difficult it's to remember. Climbers, the typical guys, 90% of the officers are climbers. They just want to go up the political or bureaucratic ladder. They are not concerned with ethics, people, or anything. They just worry about pure self-interest here. Conservers, minimum change. They are the dead wood. These are the most dangerous people. Zealots, very good people. They are like statesmen. Are highly motivated, committed to push for a policy or program and are filled with enthusiasm. Advocates, concerned with maximizing the resources of the bureau, be it personal resources or financial resources. Advocates. Statesmen have public interest. They have public interest in mind. So they advance their this thing by increasing their power so as to realize the goals. So I always thought that I'm a statesman because I have never thought of a personal interest. I always have public interest, and I believe that we can do a world-class job of administration. But we are not doing that, right? So that's why I went into politics at some point and said I need this political power so that I can push the agenda of governance, good governance using technology, etc. Right? So you have to remember that Anthony Downs is talking about the bureaucratic behavior in public choice. So public is getting these kind of choices. The climber, the zealot, the statesman, the what are the other ones? Conserver or advocates. Climbers, conservers, zealots, advocates, statements. Climbers, advocates, sense conservers, zealots, advocates, and statesmen. So people are getting a public choice here, right? So the only problem is that this is the only person who has some public interest in mind. The rest of them all have zealots are also have public interest. Zealots and statesmen have public interest, right? Right. Now comes the next big thinker. So when you think about thinkers, you have to think about what are the basic approach in the contribution? William Niskanen, it's a neoclassical approach. So he all says that this bureau maximizing approach of bureaucrats. That is, only by increasing the budget can they maximize their self-interest. So again, as we said, individuals, bureaucrats are also individuals. They seek maximum self-interest. So to maximize the self-interest, they need a higher budget. Right? That is William Niskanen. It's a neoclassical approach. So to limit the evils and discretion of bureaucrats, Niskanen prescribes certain checks, like stricter control on bureaucrats through legislature and executive interventions, increase in competition in the public delivery of services, privatization contracting out to reduce wastage, and dissemination of information about the availability of alternatives to public services. Right? So that's William Niskanen's contribution. What does Winston Ostrom say? He says we should replace the traditional doctrine of bureaucratic administration with the concept of democratic administration. Winston Ostrom is all for democratic administration, bringing more public choices in the goods and services. And he says that bureaucratic structures are necessary, but not sufficient structures for a productive and responsive public. So he is more interested in supply of goods and services, provisioning of goods and services, and said bureaucratic structures are good, but they are not sufficient structures. And he said more fragmented multi-organizational arrangements are better than a centralized bureaucracy. He says decentralization is better, creates diversity, and offers more opportunity for citizens' choice. Decentralization is the existence of diverse, democratic, small decision-making structures for providing goods and services. He further proposes bureaucratization of all administrative units and states that decentralization democracy enhance participation in the workplace and grassroots level empowerment of the people. So while he is also talking about increasing the political structures at different levels, he's also talking about bureaucratization. He wrote a book called Intellectual Crisis in American Public Administration, 1974, where he questioned the central acception of the classical public administrators. What are the classic public administrators? They say 1. Science of administration. 2. They talk about efficiency. Economy. And effectiveness. Then they talk about value neutrality. Right? What else do they think? So what are the central assumptions? What is politics? Oh, I forgot to say that. They talk about politics administration dichotomy. Right? Single central source of power. Hierarchy. Here's the need for diverse democratic decision-making structures. And if you see the 73rd and 74th Amendment, I think Winston Ostrom is proved right. Right? Because even though they are not being given powers, funds, functions, and functionaries, still it's an evolutionary process, and we see some of the states doing extremely well on decentralization. Right? So he urged the need for diverse. So one is politics administration dichotomy. Second is single center and source of power in all. So and hierarchical ordering. So he talks about the desirability of a decentralized democratic model and organizational competitiveness. To stimulate healthy and democratic competition among government agencies, multi-organization arrangements are better than monocratic hierarchical administrative structures. So basically, we are talking about administrative structures. It can be from the private sector also, it can be from the NGO sector also, it can be from the club sector also, it can be from the voluntary sector also. Then there's a somebody called Patrick Dunleavy. He's got a bureau shaping model. Bureau shaping model is nothing more than increasing the influence of bureaucrats. Increasing influence of IAS officers because they offer advice to political executives. Right? They offer advice, and that's how they increase. So earlier, Winston Armstrong and others said they are trying to increase their importance by self-interest by having bigger budgets. Right? They have bigger budgets. They also get their own personal benefits. That's what they say. But bureau shaping model is about increasing influence because they are in touch with the politicians on a daily basis. So this model, Patrick Dunleavy's model, refutes the earlier thing that bureaucrats attempt to maximize budgets. Says that apart from managing a large organization, bureaucrats tend to maximize their status by rendering advice to politicians. So when you give an advice to a politician and the politician decides on the basis that, then your power goes up. That's called bureau shaping model. And the questions have been asked on this. And you can never forget Patrick Dunleavy, and it's part of what is called public choice approach. General recommendations by scholars on public administration. So they say that based on all of this, please go ahead and do organizational reforms. Reduce the state and reduce the discretionary powers of bureaucrats and politicians. Curb the power of government monopolies. Put constitutional checks and balances. Right? The advisory separate wherever possible. They should not be the judge, jury, and executioner, is what they say. The size functions offloaded, teachers controlled, competitiveness among publications encouraged. These are the standard recommendations given by the entire group of public choice theorists. So what we have to understand about this came somewhere in the 1960s. 1960. That is, it has become mainstay of this practice of pluralism is become the mainstay of current developed and developing countries. This practice of corporation must be a mainstay of current developed and developing countries. We do what's called the buyout. We do the buyout to employees. There are so many methods of contracting out. It's called basically marketization. The extreme form of marketization is selling your assets to the private sector. That's called privatization. Privatization. Selling assets, second is contracting out or outsourcing. Third is buy out, give to your organization, etc. etc. There are different methods. So most of the countries also went to the downsizing of the governments, right, based on this. So the impacts of public administration, the public choice theory has been huge, right? And you will see impacts of public choice are in action when you reach government, when you see public-private partnerships, when you see outsourcing happening. Then you realize, oh my God, the public choice theory is in action in all these areas, right? Action. The rubber is not working well, right? Public partnerships. So most of the countries have moved towards downsizing government, contracting out services to private. Most of the countries have resorting to public-private partnerships, government contracting out services from private education to health, resorting to public-private partnerships in delivering goods and services. So, but there are different schools of thought which says that this is not good for the country.